أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, our dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining us once again. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel Enlightened Thought. You can also follow us on Facebook, sydney.org.au. I would like to welcome with me Dr. Hassan Lamy for tonight's session. Please share your thoughts, your questions, your comments with us. We will be following your thoughts and insights closely in light of our journey with the Quran in 30 nights. Tonight's session will feature by Brother Hassan Lamy a scaffolding of Surat Al-Israa and Surat Al Kahaf, and I will present the timeless lessons, including the contemporary dimensions we can make sense of in light of the companions of the cave as narrated in the Quran in a world universal historical context. Without further ado, let us now move to Sheikh Mohammed al-Dihnawi for the first recitation of the Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا.
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Again, we would like to congratulate the Muslim Ummah on the auspicious occasion of Imam Hassan's birthday. Inshallah, we can learn and attain his qualities and attributes during this blessed month and apply it in our life. The section that was recited is from Surat Al Kahaf, about the story of Ashab Al Kahf. But before going to Surat Al Kahf, as you may know, Juz' 15 is composed mainly of two chapters, Surat Al-Israa or Surat Al Kahf. In the first part of section 1, I'll be covering the scaffolding of Surat Al-Israa. And that will be the general trend for the coming nights as well, that I'll try to cover the scaffolding of the chapters, providing a foundation and framework for our dear listeners and audience in order to delve a bit deeper in each chapter and gives them an idea and a vision when they are reciting these verses. So Surat Al-Israa is Surah number 17, composed of 111 verses. The scholars say most of the verses in this chapter are Meccan period, and a few of them are revealed in Medina. This surah is also known as Surah Bani Israel because the story of Bani Israel is mentioned in detail. Also, it is known as Surah Al-Subhan, the other name, because it starts with Subhan alladhi asra bi'abdihi, and multiple times this word has been mentioned. But the most famous name is the name Isra. Isra in Arabic refers to the trip that the Arabs used to take during the night. Because as you may know, the Arabic Peninsula was a desert. It was very hard during the day to travel and make it sort of impossible to travel during the day. So they used to travel at night. So this night travel is called Al-Isra. But also it has other connotations. When we look at Quran, for example, 3 places it says فَأَسْرِ بِعِبَادِي لَيْلًا in regard to Musa alayhi salam and the Qawm Bani Israel, that take the Qawm Bani Israel away during the night. Mean as if the connotation in Isra is you go and you travel at night from a place of insecurity to a place of security. But also Isra has another connotation, and that is to go to the peak. And that's why Mi'raj is connected to Isra, because you're going to the peak, you're going to the maximum point in terms of its position. So this is the meaning of Isra. Now, when we look at the chapter, we can see the chapter is about one of the Ibadullah. Not only one, the best of the Ibadullah. Asra bi'abdihi. And we know God, we are all Ibadullah, but if God calls someone an abd, it carries a meaning. It carries a significance. Here it refers to dear Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So Prophet, as we know, used to do tahajjud. He had to wake up and to do tahajjud. One of the nights that he was doing this spiritual reflection and introspection and intuition, then he was taken to this trip. Now, whether this trip is physical trip, whether it's a spiritual trip, the minimum we can say is a spiritual trip. This is a separate discussion which is not for tonight, but I just want to cover the foundation of the chapter. So while Prophet was having this tahajjud, this spiritual reflection, he was taken to this trip in its spiritual format or physical format or both. And then through this spiritual trip, he was shown the previous nations, where you have the connection between Masjid al-Haram and Masjid al-Aqsa. Aqsa here means the masjid in the furthest point, because as we know, Masjid al-Aqsa as exists today was not established during the time of Prophet, which is 611. The masjid was established about year 700 something. But it refers to the tradition of Musa and the prophets of that lineage, in order to connect these two traditions, and Prophet can gain this knowledge and this understanding in Surat Al-Israa. So as a result, Prophet had this deepening in terms of spirituality, connection, unity, and understanding. And what is interesting, the first verse ends with As-Sami'u al-Basir. He is all hearing and he is all seeing. In other words, if we can deepen our soul, especially during these nights and the coming nights of Qadr, we can have this Isra. We can have this night trip going from the place of insecurity to security. This trip where we can go from the trough to the peak. But we just require, as Augustine Comte used to say, you don't need to scream when you're making a prayer, because God doesn't need screaming to hear you. Rather, you need to be silent to hear His voice. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we need to just have these moments of silence, reflection. And unfortunately, one of the don't want to give a value judgment to this tradition. We scream too much during these nights of prayer, which is not bad, but probably sometimes as well part of that night. Let us have this silence and reflection. Now, when we look at throughout the chapter, we see 4 major topics. Now I want to draw the geometry of the chapter. So you have 4 major topics interlinked together. At-tasbih, which is making sure you have a proper understanding of God. Whatever image you make of God is a limited image and it's not God. We know that. But we want to make sure whatever thought we have is a proper thought, because as we explained in the previous nights, depending on what definition you have about God, philosophical definition, jurisprudential definition, mystical definition, mystical Rumi definition, mystical Ghazali definition, it makes a difference. So here, at-tasbih, which is mentioned multiple times. Then alhamd, through the attributes of God, as-sifat, al-sifat al-kamaliyya lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third is at-tawheed. At-tawheed in 3 parts. Tawheed al-wujudi in terms of the existence, at-tawheed al-malikiyya in terms of the ownership, and at-tawheed al-wilaya in terms of the authority. And what is interesting, and the last part is at-takbir. At-takbir is this glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what's interesting, towards the end, I think verse 110, the chapter finishes again connecting these 4 points together. وَقُلِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي. So Alhamd, that's the Hamd section. Lam yattakhid walada, that's Tawheed in terms of the wujud. Walam yakun lahu sharikun fil mulk, that's Tawheed in the Malikiyya ownership. Walam yakun lahu waliyyun min al-dhul, and that's Tawheed in wilaya, the authority. Wakabbirhu takbira, and that's the takbir. Now you have these 4 pearls connected together. Another important notion in this chapter is al-insan. And al-insan, here 4 major attributes have been mentioned. Ajula, which we'll talk about in Surah Al Kahaf, he's hasty. Kafura, he's ungrateful. Ya'usa, he's deeply becomes disappointed. And Qatura, meaning he's stingy. When he's given the wealth and the opportunities, he doesn't want to share with the other. So you have these 4 things which form the 4 pillars. It's known as the tasbihat al-arba'a that we say in our salah. Subhanallah walhamdulillah. That in rak'ah 3rd and 4th we say, it's called tasbihat al-arba'a. So you have this insan. To connect insan to these 4 components, you have Al-Quran. It's one of the chapters where Quran actually has many attributes. So Al-Hidayah is mentioned, Al-Dhikr is mentioned. Well, I think one of the most important characteristics and attributes of Quran mentioned in this chapter is in verse 82. وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. If we treat this Quran as a shifa, I'm not talking from a therapeutic perspective or physical perspective, rather these moral vices, this is spiritual afflictions that we suffer, the vices that we talk about, animosity, jealousy, comparison, dishonesty, and so on and so forth that we can have in our life. Treat Quran as a prescription for moral vices. Go to Quran to achieve that. So to connect human to these 4 pillars of human existence, at-tasbih, hamd, tawheed, takbir, the connection is Al-Quran, to understand as a hidayah, to understand as a dhikr, to understand as a shifa. And the last part, which is very important in this chapter, is verse 22 to 39. We don't have time to go through them, but 22 to 39 is similar to other chapters that we have covered, what we call the 10 commandments. So it starts from Tawheed. Always Quran starts from Tawheed, this theoretical backbone. Then goes to the respect to the family, the parents. Then goes to issue of infaq, which is the charity and economical distribution of wealth in the community, and the other factors. And it again ends in 39 with the concept of Tawheed. So this is in a nutshell basically the scaffolding of Surat Al-Israa. Sorry if I took a bit longer.
Hassan, thank you, Brother Hassan, for this interesting geometric scaffolding of Surah Al-Israa. Let us now revisit Sheikh Mohammed al-Dihnawi for the recitation of the Quran on Surah Al Kahaf. Hassan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, dear brothers and sisters. Surah Al Kahaf is one of my favorite chapters in the Holy Quran that I deeply connect with for a number of reasons. But the first introduction that I would like to shed light on is, why did the Quran describe the young people in this story as Ashab al-Kahf as opposed to the 7 sleepers? We know that this story has its roots in the Greek legends, and it's not limited to the monotheistic traditions per se. We know Mark Twain commented on it. We know Edward Gibbon commented on it in the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. We know bishops commented on it, and Muslim scholars commented and tried to understand it. Nevertheless, the surah of Al-Kahf in the Quran continues to hold timeless lessons for us across time and place. So why the Quran chose companions of the cave as opposed to the 7 sleepers? If you look into the Quranic surah of Al-Kahf, you will notice there is no explicit reference to sleeping per se. But rather what you find is a deep sense of reference to meanings that imply qiyam, awakening, ba'atha, resurrection, i'tizal, a tactical and proactive choice to retreat, as opposed to uzla, which is enforced by the society on people. you see companionship, you see futuwa, spirit of youth, you see that sense of travel in time. So what we are gaining from these references in the Quran is not looking at the act of sleeping per se, as some thought across history, but rather a particular purpose and philosophy behind sleeping, which we will contextualize in the broader context in the second part. When I reflected on companions of the cave, Ashab Al Kahf, I remembered the first lesson I learned in sociology, which is looking at the etymological and hybrid composition of the word sociology. In sociology, we ask two questions, and these are the foundations and principles of the discipline. Number one, when do you feel most at home? And number two, what is it about our environment that helps us feel secure? Sociology is a hybrid term that combines the Greek word socius, meaning companionship, with the Latin ology, which means study of. Doesn't this remind you of Ashab Al-Kahf? Doesn't this allude to something sociological about the themes in this surah? When we look at companionship in sociology, we are interested in relationships. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, look at the faithful relationship of these young people with their master. Look at their loyal relationship amongst themselves, and look at their challenge and questioning of an unjust power relation in society.
So three different relationships.
Three different relationships. Some are positive, some are negative. My dear brothers and sisters, the people or the companions of the cave, when we look at the word sahba, we find a beautiful insight related to how they approach their society, the oppression of their society. And I'll get to this point about non-violence, as the Mahatma Gandhi theorized and practiced in the modern age, which is very important in light of this ayah. There are layers of meaning that we give to these relationships from which we derive a sense of belonging or lack of belonging. In other words, the companions of the cave refused to have a sense of belonging to a particular injustice in their society. But this act of resistance did not disallow them from maintaining a profound love for their society, despite this oppression and despite this injustice. Which goes to show you that their sense of belonging was twofold. On the one hand, they had this belonging to their values, but on the other hand, they had this belonging to their society, which allowed them to feel the sense of concern for reforming that society in refusing to belong to the injustice of that society. As you know, Ashab al-Kahf, it's a 5th century Christian tradition that talks about 7 young people during the time of the Roman Emperor Decius, from the year 249 to the year 251. And it talks about the persecution in the Decian Roman period, such that these young people had to flee for safety to a cave outside of that city known as Ephesus. And Ephesus was a Greco-Roman classical city that had so much significance that it was the cultural heartland of the Greek civilization, but later it became an important cultural site for the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, when we look at the Quran, Surah number 18, we have nearly 20 ayat that speak about this story, from ayah 9 to ayah 27. The focus in the literature of the general studies around this surah can be summarized in 4 main points. Number 1, looking at the sources and historical validity and archaeology of the tradition. And here we see archaeologists racing in a capitalist competitive marathon to try and promote a particular cave or site for their own tourist country to benefit from. And I won't go into detail. Nevertheless, I still consider this competition a good competition in order to dig and see where the historical fact lies. But in any case, the Quran, as we will see, does not pay so much attention to these historical facts because the Quran wants us to focus on the lesson. So that's number 1. Number 2, interpretation of the tradition in the Christian context. Number 3, interpretation of the tradition in the Islamic context. And number 4, the spiritual and theological significance of a shared Christian-Muslim tradition in the contemporary world. So the veneration that we have to this story is also remembered in the calendars of the Latin, the Syrian, the Maronite, the Coptic, the Armenian, the Ethiopian, the Byzantine churches, let alone the Muslims. But let me just focus on the last point I mentioned about how Ashab Al Kahaf, this particular tale or story which the Quran says it's a naba, again it's a true story. How did it impact the humanitarian struggle in the modern age? I remember the French Catholic scholar of Islam, Louis Massignon, who passed away in the year 1962. This guy was a true scholar of comparative theology who had very good relations with the Algerians, especially during the independent war of liberation in Algeria from 1954 to 1962.
And he was the teacher of Sharia.
And he was the teacher of Sharia, absolutely. So Louis Massignon looked at this story in terms of a shared hope in the justice of God, as well as the resurrection of the believers and humanity. In 1954, he established an interesting annual joint Muslim-Christian pilgrimage to the Chapel of the Seven Sleepers, a site in northwestern of France, known as in the region of Brittany, which was considered sacred since the 6th century, and which was considered a sacred site devoted to the Seven Sleepers. So in the year of the Algerian War of Independence, when he announced this initiative, in order to reconcile the grievances of both the Algerians and people in France, he invited a group of North Africans who were facing racism on a daily basis to join that pilgrim struggle and movement with their brethren, the French people. And so crowds of the Breton pilgrims every year in July would march to this place, and they would engage in a mass procession where images of Virgin Mary were carried, verses from the Quran were recited in Arabic. The mass procession was also recited in French and Latin, and even verses from the Surah of Al Kahaf were recited during this procession. And more than that, they would slaughter a lamb and share the dates, the milk and the food with all the people gathering in order to reconcile all these wounds of humanity in the modern age in light of the companions of the cave. My dear brothers and sisters, I think this is an important point for us to reflect on and to see how these Quranic insights are for the world and not just for Muslims. And we have the responsibility today, just like Louis Massignon used to say. He used to say, history as an Iraqi young man taught me when he was...
He went to search for Hallaj.
When he went to search for Hallaj, he said, an Iraqi young man taught me that history is a chain of witnesses, and each one of us is a witness in that long chain.
Allah.
And so we have this responsibility to bring out the lessons of Ashab Al Kahf to respond to the tragedies and problems of our day and age. I'll pause here. Let us go for a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue after the break, inshallah.
أحسنتم.
إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن كل من كان محبا لهم كل من كان محبا لهم يدخل الجنة من غير حزن يدخل الجنة من غير حزن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن كل من كان محبا لهم كل من كان محبا لهم يدخل الجنة من غير حزن يدخل الجنة من غير حزن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن حب أهل البيت فرض عندنا حب أهل البيت فرض عندنا وبهذا الحب لا نخشى المحن وبهذا الحب لا نخشى المحن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن لعلي وحسين وحسن.
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you, Akh Mohammed, for such an enlightening understanding of Ashab Al Kahf, which is, to me, it was very new and it basically explored the story from a very contemporary and very pertinent to our life issues. Before I cover Surah Al Kahf from again its foundation and provide a geometry of the chapter itself, just a few narrations from Hassan Lamy, which I put together to read for you. O the son of Adam, try to avoid what is made forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and purify yourself, then you can call yourself a pious man. Be content to what God has distributed, then you will be needless in your life. Be good to your neighbors and you will be called a Muslim. And treat people the way you like to be treated, then you will be a just person. Going to Surah Al Kahf, as Mohammed covered one major section in it. Surah Al Kahf, very similar to Surah Al-Israa, starts with Alhamdulillah, with a difference. There the hamd was focused, as we said, on the tasbih, on the tawheed, and on the takbir, connecting human via Quran. Here the hamd is related to prophethood and the book of God, Quran. Surah Al Kahf, it is one of the most difficult chapters to understand. It is just very hard to grasp the notion in it. There are 4 stories mentioned in it, and all the 4 stories are just hard to comprehend, especially using our current understanding of human life. Especially the story of the 3rd story, which is the Musa and Abd Salih. As I go through, I'll explain. But in general, in the Islamic history and tradition, it's been one of the most difficult chapters to understand, explain, and provide basically an exegesis on different verses. There are 2 major topics which are covered throughout this surah, this chapter. One is the issue of Tawheed, and the other one is the issue of Ma'ad. And these 2 factors are explored through 4 stories mentioned in this chapter. As a result, 2 lines emerge. The line of the faith and Amal al-Salih. You will see Amal al-Salih throughout this chapter in all the 4 stories being a major focus. The other line is the line of forgetfulness and worshipping the world, and Nisyan. Again, Nisyan is another major word which is being repeated in this chapter. So we can divide the chapter into 4 parts. The first part, which is the introduction to the verse, and usually all the chapters, the first verse or the first set of verses provide us with the contents of that chapter. And the last few verses, as a general rule, and the last few verses of any chapter provides the conclusion of that chapter. So first it starts with, as I said, with the hamd, with this notion of glorification and thanking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through 2 things. One is prophethood and the other one is the book, the Quran al-Karim. The second part, which is again the first set of verses, I think up to verse 8, it is an address to the Prophet, how he should approach the issue of promoting religion and how he should treat those who oppose him. In the third part, you have the 4 stories, which I'll go through them. And in the fourth part is the conclusion, where the issue of Ma'ad, Jannah and Nar is put together. The first story which Muhammad has covered is the Ashab al-Kahf, the people of the cave, or the companions of the cave. They say one of the possible time of revelation is the 8th year of Hijrah, towards the end of the life of the life of Holy Prophet, so which has an indication as well. In this story, the major theme is the theme of time, how time is relative to human understanding. So it is the notion of time and how relative this notion is. As I said, the two lines, the line of Amal al-Salih and the line of forgetfulness, in this chapter 4 reasons are given why human is forgetful. One of them is in this story, which is the issue of time. We don't have time to cover it, but I would recommend to read the book A Brief History of Time by the British physicist, I forgot his name, he passed away, Stephen Hawking. A Brief History of Time. It is a very small book, and it's a great book to understand the notion of time and how relative it is and how it can change our perception. Moving on, the second story is the story of the two men. One of them is Salih, and the other one, who is rich, is an arrogant person. Here, the second reason for nisyan, forgetfulness of human being, is mentioned, and that is the issue of az-zina, the issue of the wealth. When you are given this wealth, status, position, education, you feel like that's it, you own it. You are the god of the world. You can manage everything, nothing can touch you. If you remember Ashab al-Hijr, we talk about Hutuna, that they used to build these houses and nothing can touch them. So they get the sense of ghurur wa takabbur, this sense of arrogance, this sense of superiority, and they are better than the others, and the nisyan comes as well. While the friend who was faithful, who had the amal al-salih, he tried to recommend to his friend, who is this wealthy, rich person, that anything in this world is impermanent. What Buddha called the law of impermanence in this world. And that's where the attachment comes, and attachment causes suffering because you lose it. So he tried to remind him of this. And even when it comes to the zina of the hayat, which are the wealth and family and basically having an offspring, he said that they're good, but what is everlasting is baqiyatul salihat. Again, the notion of as-salih, the good deed, the good action. So they say one of the possibilities is this story was revealed in the 12th year of Bi'tha, just before the migration. The third story, which is personally for me the hardest story in Quran to understand, to explain, and to justify every part of it, is the story of Musa and Abd al-Salih, which is from verse 60 to 82. This story gives the third factor for nisyan, forgetfulness, and that is the issue of being ajul. In the other chapter we said 4 human characteristics. Ajul was one of them. This hasty, that you want to jump to the conclusion, you want to know what's happening, and obviously what is related to it is lack of patience. So hastiness, lack of patience, which connects to the third point, which is lack of knowledge. So when you don't have knowledge, patience is too hard, and you become hasty in making decisions. That's why just in this part from 60 to 82, the word sabr has been mentioned 7 times. The word istata'a in the negative form, lan tastati'a, the sabra, which reflects the limitation of human knowledge, has been mentioned 5 times. Again, this Abdul Salih, look, even the Prophet of God, the issue of hastiness and patience, it's a relative concept. Even the Prophet of God, one of the Prophet Ulul Azm, he did not have that level of patience compared to Abdul Salih, who is said in the narration Prophet Khidr, but Quran doesn't mention it's Abdul Salih. Anyhow, this story, with all honesty, for me, it's very hard to comprehend one of the parts of it, but in a nutshell, the point it wants to emphasize: lack of knowledge, impatience, hastiness. And the last story in this chapter is the story of Dhul Qarnayn. These last 2 stories, Musa and Dhul Qarnayn, they are revealed, one of the possibilities again, in the year of 7 of Bi'tha, which Muslims are under so much hardship. and difficulties and sufferings and pains. So it wants to give this notion of patience and being reliant on God's knowledge and God's promise. Dhul Qarnayn mentions the fourth component of nisyan, the forgetfulness, and that is the issue of injustice, the issue of power, imbalanced power distribution in a society. They say Dhul Qarnayn refers to the story where Ya'juj and Ma'juj, referring to the people from north east of Asia, possibly Mongols and other tribes, Tatar tribe of that region, who used to come and attack the Middle Eastern region and the east, the Near East regions. So referring to that, and Dhul Qarnayn, because God makkanahu, gave him this possibility and this power, which we don't know the details of it from a Quranic perspective, was able to defend the issue of injustice and the issue of power distribution, which was imbalanced in that region, and protect the people. So in a nutshell, this chapter wants to teach us the two very difficult concepts, one Tawheed and Ma'ad, through four stories, in order to indicate the issue of forgetfulness, which is in the etymology of the word insan. One of the roots is an-nasayan, that in nature we are forgetful people, and four possible reasons. One, the relativity of the time, and we are bound and restricted by time. The issue of az-zina, the issue of the wealth, power, status, the issue of hastiness and impatience, and the issue of injustice. To you, Akh Mohammed, if you have any point to mention.
Thank you, Brother Hassan Lamy, for allowing us to swim with you in this deep ocean of Surat Al-Israa and Al Kahaf. Thank you for connecting the dots for us. Inshallah, now we can listen to Sheikh Mohammed Al-Dihnawi for the final recitation of the Quran for tonight's session. Hassan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا ماكثين فيه أبدا وينذر الذين قالوا اتخذ الله ولدا ما لهم به من علم ولا لآبائهم كبرت كلمة تخرج من أفواههم إن يقولون إلا كذبا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you, Brother Muhammad Sadiq, for bringing to my attention a very important observation. The root ology may be traced to the Greek and not to the Latin, given that its origin is logos, although I read it in one of the sources as from a Latin. Nevertheless, but I think it's important that we think and we dig deeper to find the actual accurate etymology. So thank you, Brother Muhammad Sadiq. Let me just quickly now move into the Islamic version of Ashab Al Kahf. The beauty about the Quranic version of this chapter is that it is ahistorical,
timeless,
timeless,
and place related.
Hassan, if we look at the 1,000 years to the late 16th century of manuscripts and accounts and retellings of this story, we will find ourselves drowning in detail. And so the Quran comes to relieve us from this over historical detailing of the account in order to rediscover the lesson and surface these lessons to the horizons of our society and our future. We don't know where nor when the event took place in the Quran. The Quran does not borrow this story from other sources, although it does draw on it, to be very precise, in the sense that the Quran is addressing its audience with the idiom that they are familiarized with. So in the Arab Peninsula, we know there were Christians. And so the Quran is not only addressing Muslims, it's also addressing Christians. So that's a point to bear in mind. The traditionalist understanding of this surah in the Quran have 8 limitations that I surveyed. Number 1, they focus on the orientation of the cave. Number 2, the number of the companions. Number 3, the protective power of the companions. Number 4, the presence of the dog. And a scholar, I remember, written a long piece just trying to describe what color the dog was, which I find really bewildering. Nevertheless, number 5, 309 years of sleep. Number 6, the notion of companions as sign. Number 7, the importance of the hour. And number 8, the turning and rocking of the companions. These limitations, unfortunately, do not provide us with any sense of insight into the lessons. So they scratch the surface without actually diving into the ocean. And so let me begin by focusing on the notion of futuwa. إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ. Why did the Quran specify their age group? I think the Quran is trying to teach us here that young people represent the pillar of strength and not weakness, as we sometimes assume in society. So guidance in this ayah comes from young people and not from older people. So again, it is challenging the common sense. Now, what is futuwa? Futuwa in the Arabic Islamic tradition has 4 beautiful values. Number 1, freedom of choice. Number 2, enthusiasm, the eagerness to involve yourself in a cause that you think is important and significant. But enthusiasm comes from entheos, which means God inspired. 3, courage. And 4, self-awareness. Now, when we look at the futuwa in the Quran, this youthfulness, we find it in the following verses. قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم. Now look at the context of young people in the Quran. Ibrahim, the young man, is mentioning the idols and resisting against them. وَإِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ, the companions of the cave. وَلَا تُكْرِهُ فَتَيَاتِكُمْ عَلَى الْبِغَاءِ. Do not compel, do not force. This is in the context of pre-Islamic Arabia. The female slaves to engage in prostitution, and they would exploit them from that. لا يقولن أحدكم عبدي وأمتي, as in the tradition. ولكن ليقل فتاي وفتاتي. The Prophet is teaching them, because the slavery institution was still embedded, and the disintegration of this institution had to take time to gradually be overturned. The Prophet is teaching them in this tradition to change the names, to change the language as the first baby step in the process of uprooting the slavery institution. So do not call those under your authority my slave or my female slave, but rather my young man or my young woman. My dear brothers and sisters, when the Quran says إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا, they were facing a twofold pressure, these young people. A pressure from those who love them, their family, and a pressure from those who are against them, the authorities and the society. Now the word ladan is a special kind of mercy that they are asking for, because they understand their context. And by the way, when you read Surat Al Kahaf, you will realize that it is actually talking about the cycle that we need to go through on a weekly basis. Because as you know, Surat Al Kahaf is recommended to be read on Friday. So as if Islam is teaching us that you need to go through these 4 cycles of internal and social change in your process of engaging with your society every week. Number 1, the process of change begins in the cave, and the cave symbolizes a novel ID. But this novel ID is still vulnerable, innocent and weak, as we see in the companions of the cave. They understand their vulnerabilities, and this is the fourth value, which is self-awareness. They know that if they keep this novel ID in society, it will die. It will be overcome. And so they were intelligent enough, and this is the meaning of huda, to understand that this is not the time to wrestle in society defending their ID, but rather it is a time to protect the ID away from that society. That's one, the novelty, the enthusiasm of discovering a novel ID. Number 2, as Brother Hassan mentioned, the story of the 2 men over the gardens. This story talks about the second stage, which is the dialogue. After you come up with a novel ID, you need to expose it to dialogue with other people. And this doesn't mean that you compromise on it, but it means that you allow it to be exposed to that sun of dialogue, to that light of dialogue. To be critiqued, and not to think that this idea can flourish just within your own intelligence and novelty. And number 3, Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khidr. The third phase is that of implementing it in reality in order to see the limit of your idea, and not to assume that it will be applied as you prior had in knowledge and in thought. And number 4, Dhul Qarnayn, the najah, the success. After going through the dialogue and the trial and error, you will see that this novel idea will take shape and form through the right means of your society and through the right means of power. Nevertheless, I'll quickly wrap up. So when the Quran says إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. Now هيئ in Arabic means to furnish, mold and change the situation. So now they are asking Allah to make the impossible possible, which is a very interesting approach to having hope despite being censored, despite being attacked, despite being chased by the society. فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا. We struck their ears. This is the theology of love and mercy in the struggle for social justice. Look at how the Quran links the mercy of Allah with our vulnerabilities in our horizontal struggles with our society. فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا. The Arabs in pre-Islamic Arabia, they used the word darab to signify the process of tapping onto the ears of a baby to fall asleep without feeling insecure. So look at the care Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for young people, and especially for those struggling for social justice in their society. وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا. Now we see these people nervous, frightened and terrified in the court when they are appearing in the trial before the king. They are frightened. The Quran tells us that their hearts had to be tightened. وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ, to give them that resilience. But we see them explaining their case. إِذْ قَامُوا. And the beauty of the word قَامُوا is related in the Arabic etymology to qawm and to qima, which is value. So when the Arabs used to say Ya qawm, our people, Nida li'a'la'i qima, they would call upon their people in order to revive a particular value that has been forgotten. So when Allah describes them إِذْ قَامُوا, meaning that they stood up in order to revive a virtue that was forgotten and that was concealed in that society. And as you know, there is a sense of awakening in the process of standing up. So as if when you stand up with these values and you face that society, you were trying to remove all the dust on that society, which is blinding that society and disallowing it from perceiving the beauty of virtues. فَقَالُوا رَبُّنَا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Then they say, our Lord is the master of the heavens and the earth, and we will not call upon anyone besides him. إِذَا لَقَدْ قُلْنَا إِذًا شَطَطًا. Now they are saying that if we do so, if we fall into this social shirk, into blindly following the orders of that king, then we will betray the notion of Tawheed, which is about the equality of humanity before God. And so they are basically attacking symbolically the king himself. And that's why you see when kings and authorities and tyrants, when they feel threatened through non-violent means, what they do is they resort to maintaining the order through passing down a death execution. I won't go into more detail. I wanted to discuss the other aspects. However, I'll finish off with what this actually means for us today. Brother Hassan mentioned traveling in time, just in 2 minutes, quickly. In the Islamic civilization, after the tragedy of Karbala, a secret group of philosophers revived the timeless lessons of the companions of the cave in order to express resilience and resistance through non-violent means against the sectarian conflicts of the Muslim society back then. What these people did in Basra in the late 10th century, known as Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, in the aftermath of Karbala, they imagined projecting themselves onto the past such that they had to choose to fall asleep and reject a corrupt society by subsequently traveling in time through the act of sleeping. Obviously as a symbolic and literary means of making sense of that notion. So what happened is, in the epistle on resurrection, the brethren took the 309 years of the Quran in the surah and added 45 to it, so that at the time of its composition, their awakening would still lie ahead in the future. But the beautiful thing about this, my dear brothers and sisters, is that they realized that you can disarm your opponent You can expose their moral defenses. You can weaken their morale by making them feel that you will not be part of this society. You will retreat from it. You will announce non-violent resistance in order to deliver a message that I do not have the honor to be part of an unjust society. And so sleep is that refusal against injustice that is not only non-violent but as vulnerable and as non-cooperative as possible. In other words, when the government fails to protect us, the cave steps in to protect us. If the present is so vulnerable and so weak in its values, the quickest way to get to the future is to sleep. And so, like a time traveler, you arrive in a blink of an eye to the desired future. My dear brothers and sisters, you know how the Quran concludes Surah Al Kahaf? Though the sea became ink for the words of my Lord, verily the sea would be used up before the words of my Lord were exhausted, in Ayah 109. Doesn't this remind you that sleep is a surface like the sea, and ink to draft and to write what is to come? We write life and we live it afterward. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
أحسنتم.